Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General bringing you another Total War Warhammer 3 Legendary Lord lore video, and today we are going to be looking at Kairos Fateweaver, the legendary lord for the faction of Tzeentch, coming up in Total War Warhammer 3. So let's, without further ado, dive into his lore. Now, to really understand where Kairos fits in and how long he's been around in the Warhammer world, we have to get into a bit of ancient Warhammer history. At the very beginning, the Old Ones ruled over the Warhammer world, creating the race of the lizard men, the elves, everything except for the bad stuff like dragon ogres and greenskins, stuff like that. That all had to do with the Old Ones and their great plan for the Warhammer world. But this seems to have been derailed when two what are known as the polar gates at the poles of the world exploded, unleashing vast amounts of magic energy, allowing chaos to manifest in the world. Now, this happened about 8,100 years before the start of the current Total War Warhammer timeline, and it's around this time that we first see Kairos making an appearance when the demons of chaos have enough magical energy around them to be able to manifest in the mortal realm. And so he appeared along with many other demons at the time. Now, the lizard men themselves were the favored servants of the Old Ones, bred for a certain task with a particular plan in mind, and they were the first bastion of defense against this chaos onslaught, and mustered an army, the likes of which had never been seen before or since in the Warhammer world. Thousands upon thousands of cohorts of Saurus warriors were able to meet this demon scourge in a war that lasted centuries and claimed many millions of lives. With the polar gates having been destroyed, the Old Ones left, but the Slann were still at the peak of their power, able to split the world asunder, raise tidal waves, and draw meteors down from the heavens to destroy hordes of demons at a time. And, for a time, this strategy worked. The Slann's magic, as well as the ferocity of their Saurus warriors, were able to keep the demons at bay. But the tide of chaos was unending, and bit by bit, the lizard men were fought back to their temple cities. Here, in their temple cities, powered by the geomantic web, it looked like the lizard men's cities might be impregnable, much to the frustration of the demons outside, as they threw themselves against the Slann's magical barriers. And it was Kairos Fateweaver whose ploys and machinations led to the fall of the first of the temple cities, Tzeentch. It was he who found a way for his magics to weave past the wardings of the Slann, and so his plan came into fruition. At the height of a fresh attack on the city, Kairos focused his arcane might to open a rift in the center of the city, from which poured forth untold numbers of Khorne fleshhounds, who with their magic resistance, the Slann were not able to easily dispose of. With threats now within the city and without, the defenses soon collapsed, and the city was overrun. By dusk, Tzeentch was a corpse-choked ruin. Blood letters stalked its streets, collecting skulls, while demonettes tortured a handful of survivors in the lizard men temples, reveling in the screams of their victims. Atop their great pyramid, Kairos picked through the bodies of the Slann mage priests, devouring their arcane trinketry, before shattering the pyramid in a maelstrom of demonic flame. With one city gone, the defensive of the others were weakened, and Kairos was able to repeat his feat at Huatl, the City of Echoes, into Lanxler, where he destroyed the home of Nakai, the warrior who would go on to become legend in the Lizardmen Society. Then, the forces moved on to Zotl, where the last desperate defenders managed to escape, led by the fierce kroq-gar. It was Kairos' plans that led to the destruction of all these cities. But all did not go his way, it seemed, for the Slann at the last city he conquered of Zotl managed to send a telepathic message to their brethren in other temple cities, warning them of Fateweaver's methods before they perished. As the demonic hordes arrived at the gates of Chakwa, the next city they hoped to destroy, he could not get through the Slann's defenses this time. They had adapted their magics, and his methodology did not work. It's at this point that it seems the magic magics of Nurgle came forward, and disease spread throughout the city, decimating the population of Chakwa and leading it to fall, but not due to the leadership of Kairos this time. This is the last we hear of Kairos in this campaign. Many other temple cities would fall to the Chaos Hordes before the war was over, but it was not through his methodologies or magic trickery. Whether he just took a lesser role in these further campaign, or departed the campaign to fight in battlefields anew, or whether the fact that his magics had lost out to those of his master's despised brother Nurgle, who's to say? But move on he did, and the next we hear of the Fateweaver is on the island of Ulthuan. On Ulthuan at this time, things are also very dire. The elves, at the beginning of the conflict, not at all a militaristic race, had quickly taken up and learnt the ways of war. But they were fighting a desperate battle. Their leader, Anarion, had taken on the power of one of their gods, becoming the first Phoenix King, and in his desperation to save his people, took up the cursed sword of another, the Sword of Cain. A horribly cursed item that would have repercussions for the Elven Lord and all of his descendants who followed. On the verge of the elves' extinction, however, Anarion's friend Kalador Dragon Tamer, the mightiest of the elven mages, had reached out to Anarion and hoped his old friend, who had fallen out with him over their disputes of how to deal with the Chaos threat, would come to his aid, as he, without Anarion's permission, had enacted a plan that he hoped would save not only the elves, but the Warhammer world as a whole. And that is the establishment of the Great Vortex, a means of taming the winds of magic that enabled the vast hordes of chaos to take a foothold in the Warhammer world. And so Anarion, not seeing many other options at this point, agreed to help his friend, and flew out on his trusty dragon with his other dragon riders to the Isle of the Dead, to help his old friend and maybe save the Warhammer world. By the time Kalador Dragon Tamer had reached out to Anarion, he had already started to enact the magical rituals that would put the vortex in place. At the very beginning of these rituals, the stirring it caused in the winds of magic alerted Kairos Fateweaver to what was going on and the huge threat it posed to the forces of chaos. Reaching out to any other demon available who would get there in time, he summoned a vast host to the Isle of the Dead to stop this threat to the armies of chaos. So, just as Anarion thought, his actions and that of his dragon riders had turned the tide of the battle. A shimmer in the air appeared in front of him, a hole in the fabric of reality. A figure of horror emerged from it, towering twice as high as any beastman, monstrous wings snapping at its back, a huge vulture-like head gazed down with eyes that held more than any elven wisdom. The appearance of this greater demon, this mighty Lord of Change, halted the rout that Anarion's fighting had caused. "Long have I waited to meet you, Phoenix King. Now, the hour of your death is at hand." "What is your name, demon?" Anarion said, "so I can have it etched on my victory, that all may know who I conquered." Fateweaver laughed. "I am Kairos Fateweaver, and I will send your soul to Tzeentch, so he may use you as a bauble for his pleasure." It stretched out its taloned hands, and ravening streams of multicolored light flashed towards Anarion. Whatever they touched, living or unliving, warped and changed. Beastmen devolved into protoplasm around them. Hardened stone ran like water. Anarion raised his blade in front of him, and the ribbons of light parted on either side of it. He pushed forward like a swimmer against a strong tide. Kairos bellowed its rage and fury and invoked another spell, but by the time it was complete, Anarion was upon him, and the black blade bit home into Kairos' flesh. Where the weapon struck, Chunks were hacked away, and ectoplasm swirled forth in a choking cloud. The demon screamed, unable to believe that anything could cause it so much pain. Its mighty taloned hands reached out to grip Anarion. Sparks flickered where the demon's grip bit into Anarion's breastplate. The Lord of Change was a being of awful magical energies, and not even the potent spells woven into the elf's armor could completely resist it. The talons bit flesh and drew blood as they sought out the Phoenix King's heart. Anarion stifled a cry of pain, and knowing he had only one chance to live, struck a blow with the black blade of Cain, piercing the demon's head. Striking its jeweled brain, it exploded into 1,000 pieces. The force of the blast hurled him through the air to land sprawling on the steps of the temple. He felt his ribs break on the impact. Behind him, the vortex surged, and a high-pitched roar filled his ears. For Anarion, that was the first of 3 other duels with greater demons before his feats on this day would be done. Fighting with a greater demon of Nurgle, Khorne, and of course the servant of Slaanesh, N'Kari, who had been responsible for the death of his first wife, and he fought at this time his children. Anarion would fall that day, but Calador Dragon Tamer plan would work. The vortex would be established, and the Warhammer world would be saved, for now at least. During the tale of Anarion, you might have noticed that he was described as only having a singular head. Whether this is the fact that he had a singular head at this point, of course, being a greater demon of the Lord of Change, or that's a lore error in the writing of the book, who's to say? But at that point, that is how he is described, as having a singular head when he fought Anarion. But perhaps later, in the events that we are about to describe, he had another head grow out of his body. But just a point of note there, that was not a mistake on my part. That is how his interaction with Anarion is described. At this juncture, it's also worth pointing out that Kairos' role in the Chaos campaign in Lustria during the Great Incursion was kind of written out of the lore between 7th and 8th edition, but short of maybe them not wanting to emphasize the collaboration between the different forces of demons, there's not a huge reason I see why he should have been written out of that campaign, and it gets him a bit more involved in the Warhammer world, so I wanted to include his role in that campaign in this video. After his duel with Anarion, we actually don't hear from Kairos in the mortal realm again for quite a while, and it's thought that probably around this time is when his master, the god Tzeentch, is contemplating something that has long tempted him. For in his realm, in his impossible, ever-changing fortress, there is the Well of Eternity, a vast repository of knowledge, and being one who constantly seeks knowledge, it has long vexed the Lord of Sorcerers, the Chaos God, because it's a puzzle he cannot solve, the one mystery he can't know, a challenge just painful in its intensity, the how much it gets to him. But he dare not enter it. It scares him. He's not sure what would happen. He's not sure if he would make it out if he delved into its deep reservoirs of knowledge. And as such, it's been debated whether he sort of threw other greater demons in there or not, but at some point, he throws in Kairos to see if he can figure out the puzzle of the Well of Eternity. Tzeentch not wanting to risk its own existence, of course. After years uncounted within its depths, Kairos eventually claws his way back out of the well. But he is changed, now able to see things even hidden from his master. His right head sees possible futures as clear as day. His left sees the past without the petty colorization of perspective bias. He sees it exactly the way it happened. Past and future pour through his body, now shriveled and twisted by the passage through the well. These gifts come with a cost, however. He is blind to the present, and this makes him vulnerable. His foresight isn't immediate, and his looking into the past isn't sort of covering what's just happened sort of a millisecond ago, and it makes him vulnerable to physical attacks. But with his new gift, he is invaluable to the Lord of Change, as he sits at his right-hand side, stirring the Stygian depths of the well, as he whispers aloud the secrets that only he can see. 9 by 9 Lords of Change transcribed these insights with quills drawn from their own plumage and imbibed with Tzeentch's own blood. As such, each secret transcribed by a Lord of Change is made a part of Tzeentch forever, and his understanding of eternity comes ever closer. Each of the other Lords of Changes who are described guard some of their little bits of knowledge they get from Kairos to themselves, and they don't share it with each other, so they very jealously guard whatever knowledge these Lords of Change can get, but Tzeentch cares not, he's getting all of it anyway. Kairos, being strong in the ways of magic before, having emerged from the well, is now unstoppable in that arena, knowing every spell in existence, even though he can't marshal them all without preparation. Such abilities make him Tzeentch's favoured agent, and so on occasion, he leaves the impossible fortress to complete tasks for his master, armed with his Staff of Tomorrow. Of late, Kairos' dealings have taken him to Bretonnia, where in the year 2520, he was dispatched to steal 12 enchanted artifacts once possessed of Gilles le Breton's companions, the first king of Bretonnia and the first Grail Knights of Bretonnia as well. But given this task, he also had a huge army at his back, a significant percentage of all of the Lord of Change's forces, it is said. Kairos ransacked the tombs of the Grail companions, nearby towns were razed, and countless thousands of Bretonians met their ends at the tentacles of demons. The Bretonnian castles were no defense against the sorceries of pink horrors, their walls transmuted by the warp fire of flamers. Only on the site of Grail Shrines could any hope to take shelter from Kairos' ravaging forces and demonic magics. With each artifact recovered, Fateweaver's demons grew stronger. In the initial battles around Montfort and Quesnel, the lances of Bretonnian knights cost the demon host greatly, but the demonic horde marched on. By the time Kairos had found 8 of the artifacts, only the boldest dukes would consider taking on his armies and would even bother to meet him in the field of battle anymore. In the 12th month of his campaign, only 1 artifact remained to Fateweaver, and it seemed the only one causing him any trouble was King Louon Leoncoeur himself. This final artifact was in Mousillon, as his forces lay siege to that cursed city. At the mercy of Kairos' demonic magic, the forces of Mousillon felt they had no choice but to ride out bravely one more time to meet a noble end. And so, the gates of Mousillon opened as the last of its defenders rode out to meet the threat, and, at the time, they fought inevitably to their doom. Little did they know, help would come from one of the most unlikely places, as a force of Nurgle demons burst into the mortal realms. For Nurgle, it is said, has long been fond of the city of Mousillon, for it has been the breeding ground of many of his favourite plagues, and he didn't want to see it fall to the hated Tzeentch. Bretonnians, for their part, only saw a vast army of demons, not knowing really the difference of what was going on, but they gave no quarter and fought like devils themselves, as the demon armies began to rip each other apart. Nurgle had sent Kroq-gar Plaguefather to lead his forces, so much did he not want to lose the city of Mousillon. And so it transpired that the 2 favoured servants of their masters met on the battlefield, and Kairos' vulnerability came to bear as Kroq-gar bludgeoned Kairos to a feathered ruin, only to find himself pierced by the blessed points of a dozen Bretonnian lances as they used his duel with Fateweaver to surprise the Great Unclean One. With both of their leaders dead, their respective armies could no longer maintain their form and vanished, leaving behind only the artifacts that had been collected by Kairos. One has to imagine that Kairos saw this as a possible fate, and either deemed it a risk worth taking, or it went exactly as he hoped. To what end? Perhaps we are yet to see how his weaving will transpire. But that is the last time we saw Kairos Fateweaver until his appearance in Total War Warhammer 3. On the tabletop, he had a number of rules. He was obviously a level 4 wizard. The idea was the left side of his head would know some laws of magic, and the right side of his head would know others. For the left side, it knew the law of life, metal, light, and heavens. For the right side, it knew death, beast, shadow, and fire. and both sides of the head knew the lore of Tzeentch itself. He obviously had Fly, Terror, and was a demon, but when you do a magic phase, you'd have to pick one head, so you could only pick spells from those particular lores on whichever head you'd picked for that turn and that magic phase. So it was a kind of a neat little mechanic around his two heads there. He also, of course, is the Oracle of Eternity, and that gave him a ward save, and he had the Staff of Tomorrow, which would help boost his magic casting potential. I am very much looking forward to getting our hands on Kairos when we see him in Total War Warhammer 3, but for now, that's all we have on the Fateweaver. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, guys, I hope to catch you on the next one. Alright guys, bye.